Ladies and gentlemen, friends, on behalf of the Dean and Chapter of Westminster, it's a huge delight to welcome you here this evening for the second of our Westminster Abbey Institute dialogues in this autumn series on the broad theme of healing. As ever, we are in Henry VII's Lady Chapel, with Henry VII buried just behind me here with his Queen Elizabeth of York, whose marriage and then joint burial, of course, symbolises a kind of healing, the end of the Wars of the Roses, a healing in English society that was earlier so needed. Last week, we considered the topic of the healing of our society. But tonight, we're picking up on the broader theme of healing by focusing on the environment. There could hardly be a better moment, a more essential moment, to discuss how we might heal our planet than at this time of the COP27 summit currently taking place in Egypt. The work is urgent if we are to learn how to live in harmony with nature's economy, to borrow a phrase from His Majesty the King. Tonight, we have two distinguished speakers to help us in this work. Tamara Finkelstein is Permanent Secretary at the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, and Sir Charlie Burrell is the owner of the Knepp estate and the inspiration behind the Knepp Wildland project. You have biographies of both of our speakers on your chairs. Tamara and Charlie will each speak to us from their own perspectives, their own experience, and engage one another in conversation before opening things up for questions and further dialogue from the floor. So without further ado, to consider this essential topic of healing our planet, please join me in welcoming Tamara Finkelstein and Charlie Burrell.
About a week ago, Tamara and I met up for the first time, and we wandered around looking at my scrubland. I have no idea what she thought about it, but she tells me she was rather pleased by the experience. Thank you, Tamara. What I've been asked to do, I guess, is just a little bit about me, a little bit about why I've chosen to do what I've done, and some of the things that have come out of what we have done at Knepp. Maybe a lot of you will have now heard about rewilding. And this is, I suppose, a little story about that particular subject. I was born in Africa, and that's not the beginning of a very long story. But I want to say that what you experience when you're born is sounds and smells. And that has lasted with me all my life now. And that sound and the smell of Africa, and that knowledge of that life thrumming and throbbing in Africa has been in the back of my head from the very beginning of my journey into actually doing something about it myself. Age 21, I took over the Knepp estate down in Sussex, 1,400 hectares of heavy wheeled clay, very poor soils, small little fields. And that was after being educated in agriculture. So I did 3 years at Cirencester and learned all about production and productivity and how to do the sums behind all the different types of things one would expect a farm to do. One of the things that struck me strikes me now is we never learned about conservation or nature at all. So it was missing from the curriculum, completely missing actually. And when I took over age 21 of this estate, and my father had decided to stay in Australia at that time, so it was skipping a generation, very good for tax planning. My grandmother was a very keen tax planner. That whole experience of not being taught about nature and conservation didn't come naturally with me, because I had grown up in countries that actually we spent a lot of time in nature and thought about it a lot. So I was bringing with me, I suppose, a little bit of a history of other thinking, other thoughts of how to manage land. I spent 20 years farming, so we had dairies and we had beef and sheep, and we had arable farming going on our land. And through that period, it was exciting. It was lovely. It was actually wonderful when you had the good years and the piles of wheat then piled up on the grain floors, and you felt very good about it all. But we never really thought about nature. We were always wanting to go somewhere else to see nature. We often, headed off on holiday to go and have a look at nature elsewhere on the planet. And it was really at the end of the 90s when this all came crashing down on us as a farm and an estate. And it was really after 17 years of really poor performance in terms of our agricultural enterprises. So we were losing money. And the only thing keeping us afloat was grants from Europe. And those grants from Europe kept us head above the water, but I could see that there may be problems down the road. So I was beginning to think, what other alternatives have I got for this land? And reminding you that this is land that was very poor in agricultural terms. So grade 3, grade 4, very poor land. Rewilding started to come into my view after meeting several people in Holland and in Belgium, in a funny roundabout way. And it was Franz Vera and his book, Grazing Ecology and Forest History, that then sparked off in my head about possible things that we could do. I don't know if it still exists. I sent a letter to DEFRA, the minister, suggesting on a one-page, I don't know if quite a lot of you civil servants here, and you may stick things up on the board, funny letters, quirky, idiotic letters. And I can remember writing this letter to the Secretary of State at the time, saying, what about joining me and turning my 1,400 hectares, 3,500 acres in West Sussex into an area where we can have bison and beavers and boar, and it'll all be wonderful. Anyway, that's such an embarrassing letter. But that letter did start me and the team around me thinking about what the alternatives from farming could be. And that journey then started, and it was thrilling. And what I was seeing all through the beginnings of this transformation from this very industrialized farming system into a more wild landscape was life pouring back in. And that life has created this hope. When you see those sorts of things for yourself, but you're being attacked from everywhere, and we were at the time being attacked. The government was being attacked, we were being attacked, and it was sort of waste of taxpayers' money was the sort of chant. And those days we weren't particularly thinking about food security, but that was coming into the picture a bit. But it was mostly about government wasting money on people like me, rich people living in castles in West Sussex. And I guess what I was seeing this transformation of what was happening to the land. I was seeing what was pouring back into this landscape. And that gave me heart and strength to carry on and do what we were doing. This transformation of this landscape has now meant that we have one of the highest breeding birds in Britain. It's meant that we are bucking the trend on things like turtle doves, which are almost extinct in Britain and will be in the next 5 or 6 years. It's meant that we've learnt things that we couldn't possibly have learnt without doing what we did. We've learnt that pigs and purple emperors have a role to play with each other. This landscape surprises us constantly and continuously. So this year we've had the large tortoiseshell butterfly starting to breed on Knepp. It's been missing from Britain for 50 years. Every year something happens, and I guess that something happening and that unknown and the experience that one goes through when you're not targeting and you're not trying to produce the right habitats and management and human control. If you allow these things to start to happen, what you find is everyone gets excited. Everyone gets excited. They get excited by the whole idea that nature can look after itself, and it doesn't need us if we just give it space. One of the things that I now involve very much, I've got a foot in both sections, I mean, landowning, farming, and conservation. And I do a lot of work on all of it, and I have a lovely time doing it. One of the things that you keep on coming up against is a generation that's a little bit younger than my father, between my generation and my father's generation. And they are not understanding at all what's missing from the landscape. They think it's okay. This idea that you don't need to regenerate anything or revive or restore, all those words, recovery, they're all out. And that's very surprising to people like me who see what can be. And that's the power of actually doing this sort of thing. You're then creating something that then people can feel and hear and smell themselves. And the hearing and the visual thing, the aids, are really, really powerful. If you come to Knepp in May and go out on a dawn safari, your experience will be, I hope, when you all do that, visceral. It'll be something that is real, tangible, and the sound waves that are coming out of that landscape rip out the air from your lungs. And that's a very powerful thing. The people that don't know what's missing carry on thinking it's all okay. And that was me. That was me 20 years ago. It was definitely, I didn't see there was a problem. Nature belonged elsewhere. One of the things that we've been working on is what is the future looking like? And so we've now spent millions of hours, both conservationists and agriculturalists and landowners, talking to government, working with government, coming up with ideas of what this landscape could look like for the future. And it all started for me when John Lawton produced his Making Space for Nature report in 2012. And that idea of more, bigger, better joined up. And with John's report, I've been working on cartoons, visualizing what that might look like. One of the real problems in the disconnect from policy and government and ideas that come out of government is you need to visualize it. If you've got a whole lot of farmers who really aren't that good at reading books or reading papers or reading reports, perhaps visualizing what you're asking them to do is one of the real strong things that I think that I can do, because I'm dyslexic and hopeless at reading and writing. So that visual thing was really very helpful. So I worked for 3 months with an artist from Holland, repainting John Lawton's plan for the country. So actually changing that, a picture of a landscape into future landscapes. And it was mainly about food production. There's nothing changed about that. It was about food production, but it was about friendly ways to deal with nature and food production. And that vision then has been, with millions of hours and a lot of your work, then translated in the 25-year Environment Act, a really important moment. There's lots of Weasley words in the Environment Act, as usual. It's very difficult to get the right wording, but that's really a very powerful step forward for me, I think. Just to finish, one of the things that have come my way is in the back of a book, which you're going to be offered to buy, okay, I hope you bought your wallet, written by my wife, there's a section about the vision about the future, which was about connecting Knepp. And it was a throwaway thought. I was thinking, wouldn't it be extraordinary if one day a corridor could be built from Knepp to the sea? And what's happened, we've got this now project called Wheel to Waves. And we have 47 farmers involved and 27 farmers actually signed up, providing habitats all the way down to the sea. We've also got 4 kilometers of the seabed that has been taken out of dredging and trawling and is now called Help the Kelp Project or the Sussex Bay Project. Because you need to tie sea and land, you need the terrestrial and the sea. So you've got a movement, you've got the beginning of a change, you've got discussions. This morning I spent 2 hours with the 27 farmers discussing if they wanted to continue because they were having to put their hands in their own pockets to pull out money to fund the next sort of stage of the journey. And it was unanimous. The whole room wanted to continue, wanted to do something. So I think we have this constant in the news battle between farmer and conservationists, food production, conservation, nature, all this struggle. And it's a mad one. It just seems to me a mad one, because the people on the ground get it, and they're up for it, and so they will make changes. I'm going to hand over to Tamara, I think, if that's okay.
Charlie, thanks so much, and thank you for hosting me on your estate. It is an absolute inspiration, as were your words just now, and look forward to conversing a bit about some of the issues that you raise. I'm going to give a bit of a feel for some of the framework by which we think about these issues, and also some of the challenges and trade-offs that we come across. But I first wanted to thank the Westminster Abbey Institute for the work that you do. It's extraordinary work in promoting public service and creating the environment in which we can discuss values in public life. A few years ago in DEFRA, my organisation, one of my colleagues was organising an away day for her team, and she struck upon the idea of asking everyone in her team to do a single slide in which they had a picture and a statement that started, "I am a public servant because." And she set it to music, which is always a good start if you're going to get people going. But it was really, really moving. There were slides that said, "I'm a public servant because I want this country to be the best it can be for ordinary people like me and my school friends, because how we run the country matters, because being part of a strong community matters to me." So we decided to repeat it, and I had to add a slide for myself. Now, my mum and dad came here as refugees from the war in the late 1940s. My mum was a survivor of Belsen concentration camp. My dad a survivor of one of Stalin's forced labour collective farm camps in Siberia, and they found refuge here. So I added my slide. "I'm a public servant because this country gave my family freedom, opportunity, and a place to build a home, and I want to give something back." So it's a real privilege to be a civil servant and to have that opportunity. In any role that I've done, I've sought to make that connection between the work I do and a positive impact on the citizens of the country that I serve. And in DEFRA, our mission is to leave the environment in a better place for the next generation, to play our role as civil servants, public servants, and political leaders in healing the planet, our subject today. I learnt a great deal from my dad, who was born in Lvov, then in Poland. Now that's Lviv in Ukraine. And his family had been in Lvov for over 200 years. And at the age of 10, he was deported by Stalin with his mother to a collective farm in Siberia, while his father was imprisoned in the Gulag as a socially dangerous individual. He survived, but never to return to his home. And when he was interviewed about his experiences, he was asked a really interesting question, and I saw the video back, and there were some things about his experiences and his reflections on them I hadn't noticed or known about before. And he was asked, if it hadn't been for the war intervening, what would your career have been? What would you have done? And he said, well, I was a dutiful son, and I almost certainly would have run the family's very successful steel business in Lvov. But in Siberia, he and his mother struggled to survive the cold and starvation, and very many people died. And he said he came to realise that the solution to the most important problems of the world and the essence of life, food, water, energy, need engineers to address them, and that's what he became. Now, underpinning DEFRA's missions are actions to make our air cleaner, our land greener, our water purer, and our food more sustainable. All the things that Charlie was talking about before, and my dad would have approved. In developing policy solutions to these fundamental questions, policy professionals work hand in glove with scientists and engineers to understand and present the evidence of the problems we face, the solutions that will have impact, and the future solutions that we need to develop. Now, I also started out as an engineer before training as an economist and later as a policy advisor, so I like a framework. And there are 4 parts to the framework that we use to take actions on healing our planet. And the first part of that framework is how we mitigate climate change by reducing emissions of CO2 and our goal to meet net zero by 2050. And already we've made progress there using more renewables for energy, solar and wind, and we're planting trees and restoring our peatlands to absorb carbon and taking action to reduce and manage food waste, including introducing consistent approach to recycling, including food. So one part of our framework, how do we mitigate those emissions and climate change? The second part of that framework is how do we adapt to climate change, because we know our planet's warming and we need to prepare by building our homes to withdraw heat and cold, by flood defences to protect our river and coastal communities, including developing natural flood defences with well-placed trees and even beavers can create, and that's part of the Knepp approach. The third part of our framework is that it's not just about our changing climate. We must reverse our biodiversity loss, restore nature and recreate and protect habitats. And the reforms that we're making to agriculture is all about how do we change how we use funding that we have for farming into supporting the sort of landscape change that we see at Knepp, and to helping farmers grow food while they're growing food to improve their soils and create habitats in hedgerows and so on. And the Environment Act, they've got a mention, a sort of balanced mention there. It includes really critically in it the legal commitment to stop the decline in species by 2030 and start to reverse it. It's a big commitment, and also a set of targets which we're setting across the range of areas where we need to improve our environment. We have that now deep in our legislation and sets us up for the future and the change we need to make. And the fourth part of the framework is very relevant to the week in which we have COP27, because it's not enough to do what we need to do domestically. We have to show international leadership. And from the last COP to this one, the UK has driven the agenda to keep ambition high on mitigation and to put nature very firmly on the agenda. At COP26, we really had that very firmly as a central part of COP, with commitments to support nature and stop deforestation. And that international leadership is completely crucial to healing the planet. So we're acting to heal our planet, and we know our actions risk not being big enough or fast enough. But my experience is that it's challenging to deliver all that we wish because it's hard and there are trade-offs, not because there is not the will from politicians or public servants. And I know that might not be a universal view, but it's a strong one that I hold. Why is it hard? Why is it hard to do the things that seem so obvious to heal our planet? Well, people have to make significant change, and change is hard. Asking farmers to change what they do that they might have done for generations, and Charlie talked about that generation before, and even about the 27 farmers who got together today, have been on a journey as to make change. Change is hard. Change is hard as to what we all need to do. Investing in an electric car, taking non-car transport, changing the way we eat. Change is difficult. That's part of why this is hard. There are even trade-offs that you have to make within really obvious actions you might take to protect the planet. If you take offshore wind, a completely crucial part of our renewables journey, renewables journey, that has an impact on our marine environment. How do you make those trade-offs so you can make progress on one and protect the other? Challenging trade-offs to make. We have to invest in the future. We have to put money, and it's hard to spend money when sometimes it feels there are more pressing issues. The cost of living, hospitals, schools. How do you make those balances? It's hard and challenging. And how do you make an impact on an issue which we know is a global challenge, and it can feel that actions by an individual, a community, or even one nation can feel ineffective if the world does not move together? So these things are difficult, and an inspiring manager told me once about the work that we do. It's hard because it's hard, not because you're stupid. It is an important thing that I kind of say to myself quite frequently, but I think it is an issue about the subject we're talking about today. A couple of years ago, I was asked by our ambassador to the Vatican to speak at a lunch for Vatican officials and priests on collaboration ahead of COP26 in Glasgow. And as we were about to sit down, she said, "I don't know if you have any faith, but it sometimes works really well to build the relationships if you talk about your faith and bring that into the conversations." So in the moment that I had, I recalled the requirement in Judaism of tikkun olam, an expectation to take action to repair the world. So I used it in my comments then. But today I speak in a church, and not just any church, but Westminster Abbey. And having more than a few moments to prepare, I consulted my rabbi, a mentor for me, Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg, who's in the audience today. He's a leader on the role faith leadership can play in healing our planet, a founder of Eco Synagogue and now Eco Judaism that is transforming both the practical and spiritual action for Jews on the environment. He told me that there is stronger teaching in Judaism than the general requirement of tikkun olam. It is the law of Bal Tashit, do not destroy, which derives from a commandment not to destroy fruit trees if taking over a city in war, and has extended through scholars, including Moses Maimonides, as a wider commandment not to destroy that which we need to live, including stopping up fountains or wasting food. It is a basis for our attention to healing and protecting our planet. I was particularly struck by having drawn to my attention these verses from the book of Daniel in his interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's vision. The words remind us of the centrality of restoring nature and the importance of trees, of mankind coexisting with other species and providing food in harmony with nature. So I'll finish my remarks with this reading from Daniel. I saw a tree of great height in the midst of the earth. Its top reached heaven, and it was visible to the ends of the earth. Its foliage was beautiful, and its fruit abundant. There was food for all in it. Beneath it, the beasts of the field found shade, and the birds of the sky dwelt on its branches. All creatures fed on it. Thank you very much. So I think now we were going to have a bit of a conversation of some of the issues that we spoke about. And I wanted to start first, if I can, by talking to you about change, because I'm struck by the strength and the confidence that you needed to make the changes you've made in Knepp. I think you underplayed those, to make that decision and to do it and to see it through over such a period that you need to do what you've done is really significant. And I was saying there's a real challenge for people as to how do you make change, and that change is hard, and we need to get people to make such significant changes. And I'm just wondering on your reflections from your experience, just more broadly, How do we support people to make those changes that we need to make?
For me, it was a conversation under an oak tree. And what that conversation was, do you realize? And I was going, well, no, I didn't really realize that. And the beginning of a change is a different view of something, isn't it? Once you then start down that road of finding that little bit of light that you see, oh, well, that may be a different way of looking at it, and yes, that is interesting. And then you start to then play with those ideas and think about how you could then implement some of those changes that you're then thinking about might be good or might not be good, you don't really know. And then you start to make those little changes. And then you see a little change, and then that change breeds change, and then you have success, and then... So I'm seeing all the way through. I mean, I have maybe, I don't know, 2,000 farmers, landowners coming to see me in small groups every year. And what I'm doing is just repeating what I've learned from other people that gave me that chink of light, saying there is something else you can do here. And it may not be what we're doing, it may be something completely different, but it's different. And they go away, and I'm now seeing, 7, 8 years down the road, all these different people coming up with really quite radical change. But they started small, they had a bit of success here and a bit of success there, and they saw what was happening, and with their own eyes, they could believe it, and that change then became more of a, what is it? It's the snowball, isn't it? I mean, it's that effect. So those little ideas can give you a glimpse of a different way of thinking, and that will give you, if you've got the courage to take that step, a different way of moving forward.
I suppose it strikes me, it's just for some to take that risk there, taking a risk that this will work, taking a risk financially, taking a risk in terms of what will they be leaving to the next generation. I suppose there's a question in a way as to what are the things that we can do to sort of help with that confidence, so government and others.
Yes, and the de-risking was actually from government. It wasn't perhaps designed for that, but it was a thing called decoupling, which I won't bore you with, but the decoupling of grant aid from being paid to produce to being paid a subsidy for just owning land allowed me the time and the money to make the change without actually much risk. So it was actually government that gave it to me, but I don't think it was designed for that. But it was certainly what happened and how I used that moment in time.
And what we're trying to do now in using the money that we had for those area-based payments, to use them to pay for environmental goods, is to try and drive the sort of change that you're making. Do you see that?
So that didn't really work, did it?
Well, we are.
But now, what we're looking at now is going to really work, I think. Yeah. So the disappearance of the single farm payment, the area payment, that's sending shockwaves through all of us. And we've got to then look at all our businesses. I was going around a farm yesterday in Dorset with a farmer from Gloucestershire. And he was describing how appalling it had been that we had been given subsidies for the last 50 years. And what he was saying, which is what they were saying just after the war, watch out, because if you start to feed free money, as it were, for just area aid payments, you're going to end up without a group of people, without the drive, the interest in making things work. And so it's been a powerful anti-growth, anti-productivity, anti-everything type of payment. Quite funny, yeah. Tamara, I guess one of the things and today we were in a room with these 27 farmers, and what we were really interested in was the area aid payment disappearing and what was going to replace it. And a lot of the room is thinking about lots of different things that's going to replace that money, and it's quite innovative and interesting, the projects that they're all coming up with. But one of the things we're obviously being told to look at and think about is natural capital and the flow from natural capital to humans. This money this fictional money perhaps, or money that we might be looking at, which is about carbon and biodiversity credits and biodiversity net gain and all the sorts of things. How do you see government's role in that beginning of a market, that interesting idea?
Yeah, I mean, it is crucial. I mean, the first thing I suppose is starting with how do we use this the area-based payments to drive and incentivise the sort of change we've been talking about, and finding both in our plans on environmental land management to channel some of the money very simply into actions that every farmer can take, right through to the sort of landscape change that you have put in place. But as you say, that's not going to be enough to make the sort of transformation we need. It needs to leverage in wider private sector investment to be able to do the sort of change we need to see. But we need to use that money as a kind of basis. And as you say, rules and regulations like biodiversity net gain, which effectively means that developers have to ensure that they not just replace but improve biodiversity either where they are doing that development or elsewhere, and therefore that can provide support for wide-ranging projects. So we need, I mean, that is what we need to have in place and to support. So we're trying to design the way in which we do environmental land management in a way that allows that to be stacked with other sorts of investment, biodiversity net gain money, water companies investing to see change, and so on. So that's part of it, is how do we set up the money so that you can stack that investment, but also how do we have a level playing field on rules and transparency and how you account for things that allows us to create that market. So that's some of the work that we are trying to do, and we're getting the kind of input from people who know how this can work to try and improve it.
Just to confirm it, we're looking at the promised spend on the 25-year environment plan, the 2.7 billion spend in the UK. There seems to be thinking that actually we're going to need to spend about 8.8 billion to do all the things that we're promising to do per year. So there's a funding gap of 6.1 billion. That's a lot of framework and help that we're going to need from government to make people want to, companies, private sector, to actually want to invest in nature. And if we're going to be calling for 6.1 billion from the private sector to help this change, which I think is possible, I really feel that because I'm talking to a lot of companies that are really very keen on trying to help this whole thing. This market that needs to be a market, it doesn't want government involvement, but it needs to have a safety net, a framework that we can all feel that actually the spend that these private sector money coming in to pay for this is actually looked after and got it's not too cowboy.
No, I mean that's exactly right, and we're at that space of developing that policy framework in order to enable that to happen, because it's exactly what needs to happen. We need rules of the game, both around how we use the public money, what are some of these other areas like biodiversity net gain look like, but also what are the kind of what are the wider kind of rules of the game. But we're in the foothills of it in our kind of green finance work. But you'll be pleased to know the Treasury has told us that we have to get at least $1 billion of that in the coming years. So we've got that target, but you've set us a higher one. But that's very reasonable. You talked a little bit about that generation between yours and your father's, and their kind of how they see what the land should be used for. And it is that very challenging question about, surely our land should be used to grow food. Do we not need to increase the amount of food that we are growing to have greater food security, especially in these times? And can we do that and yet restore nature and tackle climate change? So that is that challenge. You addressed it a little, and I just wondered to get more of your reflections on that.
The wonderful O.E. Wilson and his Half Earth. So I'm with him and thinking that we need half the planet for nature. And I think we can do it. And I think we can have food and we can have nature. And I think the urgent call is urgent, and it really is a call for all our futures. And if we think we can do without half planet, I think we are pretty fast doomed. I do feel quite strongly that the urge and the need is now, and we've got to do it. I think we can do it because I think that there's a whole lot of technologies that are coming down the road, and I think that from precision fermentation to precision biology to fly farming to all the proteins and fats and carbohydrates being produced in different ways, that's going to take up a lot less land, and they're very good conversion rates, for instance. So there's a whole lot of techniques that are going to come, but also this whole revolution of how we are farming our land and our soils. It's really taken off. It's been 2 or 3 years now of really concentrating on soils, but you go to every single farming meeting, every single landowner meeting, and all we are now talking about is soils. And we're all really interested in how that plays out, how we can reduce our purchase inputs, how we can keep more of the profits and margins in our own pockets. And so I think that's going to be a revolution, and it's coming. And you mentioned earlier on that things tend to be a bit slow in change. It doesn't happen like that in farming. Farming can go like that, and it can just go, yes, that's a very good idea, we'll go down that road. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing this very quick movement, and it's got lots of pressures, from cost pressures to actually want to then think about how you can produce food without all these inputs. But also the pressures from the Attenborough effect and also the basic payment, the single farm payment disappearing. That's also concentrated everyone's mind. So I think these things can change very rapidly. Systems change, and I think it'll all be good and it will be fine. We'll work it out.
Yeah, I think that. I mean, I do think we are at a really exciting moment in which these are the conversations that we're having more broadly, and there is a huge interest in change, also in some of that the technology that you talk about, but also how how our food and growing food and nature can sit side by side as well, and that is what we need to see. So I'm conscious that we need to bring our audience in now, I think. So an opportunity for people to ask us questions. So over to you.
What do you say to colleagues and sort of quangos who ask you about the production land should be for food security and
about the concern of sort of the food security and this? I mean, I think that the first thing to say is that we don't have a food security problem in this country, and that some of the pressures that we're seeing now, we have a big problem in terms of food prices, and of course in terms of individuals' food security, that's a massive impact, but not a concern around food security. And I think the reforms that we're looking at will be to drive an ability to do both, retain the kind of level of food production that we have while meeting some of our wider targets. It is about the sort of thing that you have at Knepp, that there is food produced on your estate. But I think that is possible. But it's how do you get the right incentives in the right place? And one of the things that we're looking at is developing a kind of land use strategy to clarify that further. So that's.
I guess, I don't know, Tim Benton, Professor Benton, he gave a talk to the Soil Association last spring, and one of the things that really struck me, and it's about meat eating, and he was talking about Ukraine and the grain exported from Ukraine and from Russia, and he'd worked out that if Europeans shifted from meat eating by 15%, half a day a week, that would be equivalent to all the exported grain from Russia and Ukraine. We need to think about what we eat. We need to think carefully about it. We also need to think how much that food costs. But it's a really complex one, isn't it? I mean, it's a tangled web. But I think behavior also will make a difference, and thinking about how much meat we eat.
Over here in the middle.
I'm always dismayed when I see fields in which farmers have chosen to plant solar panels. Would the speakers agree that there should be a law against it?
I've got 3.5 acres of photovoltaics in a field, and that produces 900,000 kilowatt hours of energy. And that, we think, is about equivalent to all our 235 tenancies and all our own consumption. So no, I don't agree with you.
And for me, it's a very active area of policy decision-making at the minute, so I'll need to be careful of what I say. But there's also there's the question of kind of whether one's putting it in land, that has less use for other things, or highly graded land is a question, but it's a very active question of policy debate at the minute.
Yes, I would concede that they're okay on former sewage farms, which have too much heavy metal to plant anything.
Well, just to finish on that, though, one thing that we are missing is a whole lot of things that we could do with those solar farms. If you imagine a solar farm is producing a lot of shade, and if you can think of ways to create shade-liking plants that grow underneath those panels, then you could actually have them as in really important insect banks. And if you can think of the early flowering plants like dead nettle, if you could grow dead nettle underneath your photovoltaics, you would be able to, that hungry gap when March comes along, you get those early pollinators and early nectar sources, and we could do that. And that would be quite interesting, to actually do a bit more with these photovoltaics.
Thank you very much for speaking with such authority, if I may say. My name is Sean Moore. One thought that I had was what shape Westminster Abbey Institute might take being wilded. It crossed my mind. It's not just landscapes, but presumably organizations too. What I wondered is, has the mood on pesticides changed in farming? You mentioned that change can happen suddenly. I think the past evidence has been that neonicotinoids particularly have damaged creatures. And at the back of that, I wonder whether you think we have, as human beings, in certain parts of the world at any rate, a psychological problem with tidiness, that we wish to tidy up nature.
Do you want me to take that? So today, I mean, literally at 1 o'clock, I was having a conversation with the third in line at the NFU, David Exwood, who's a local farmer, a very good farmer. He produces the best crops, and he's constantly winning all the prizes for the most wheat and most barley grown per hectare. And David is now in his, I think, third year of not using any insecticides at all. Another farming conversation I had last week with another farmer down on the coast, he is experimenting with 4-meter beetle banks every 26 meters. And that's to bring in the predators for the aphids, to bring in habitats for natural defenses against predation. And that is huge. And I guess just to finish on that is that my experience with farmers at the moment is they're absolutely looking at this, and they are really keen to do something. So it's a moral and also monetary thing. It's absolutely both. But they are keen, and they're doing it.
I'd echo that. I mean, in terms of what one sees of the kind of innovation that farmers are looking at, does feel like a very, very active space, and we're going to look at how we use areas of elements of the kind of funding that we have to encourage that innovation.
We didn't answer the question about rewilding.
There was one over there. Oh, sorry, you were before, perhaps. Okay, you're nearer. Let's do that, and then we'll go to the back.
Thanks. You spoke about international leadership. How do we carry that on when now we've handed over the COP presidency, and how can we kind of influence internationally as well? Yes, I mean, it has really helped to have hosted the COP. Has helped us particularly to set in train that focus on nature, but that has continued for this COP, and I think it is now quite embedded. So, we obviously continue to be very active in the COP process, but what I've learned in doing this job is that there's pretty much something of that nature to kind of influence and use every couple of weeks, different opportunities. So right following COP, we've got the biodiversity COP, the CBD COP that led by China, happening in Montreal, where we will set a framework for biodiversity. We are really active in that. It's not UK-led, but we are absolute leaders in that work and setting that framework, which will set an international framework of a similar nature to what we look at in COP27 around emissions. So we are very active in that space. And DEFRA as a department has been developing our capability to really drive particularly the international nature work together with the Foreign Office. So that will continue, and we will use those opportunities. Yeah.
Can I just add one, shouting about UK, the Wallacea Trust, which is a charitable trust based in Lincolnshire, and the team there have set about setting up a biodiversity credit scheme for the world. They've managed to train, I think, 150 World Bank employees now in what they're talking about. It's based on the framework and the language of the voluntary market, carbon market structure, but it's about biodiversity. And so we are actually leading thinkers about how we solve these problems. And that's been really very successful, and it's ripping through a whole lot of different projects around the world.
Pat's mentioned that we're particularly world leading actually around our marine environment, and we've driven a kind of international commitment to protecting 30% of our marine environment by 2030 and getting that accepted by lots of other countries. And we have huge expertise as well, and have some of the scientists in this country are going to sort of help with cleaning plastic pollutions in oceans around the world. So that's a particular area of international leadership that the UK has and has to continue.
And it has to for its own sake, but also I think it's a really important part of the political argument, because it is very easy to go, we're in a small nation, why are we doing this stuff? It makes no difference if big other countries are not doing so. So it's really crucial that we have a lot of effort into that international leadership. So sorry, it was at the back, there was one.
Sorry, this is probably a question for Charlie, going back to your agricultural college days. How much have the teaching in agricultural colleges changed? Are you involved? And do we have an international community at these agricultural colleges as well?
I can't speak with any knowledge about the subject. I know that Fiona Reynolds, for instance, has just gone to take over the chair of trustees of Cirencester, my old college that's now a university. I have a feeling that it's not going too well in terms of conservation and being taught in colleges, but it's only sort of hearsay, so I can't really talk to it.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing some work with the colleges around curriculum and so on, but I think it's on the right kind of journey. But I also don't have huge knowledge at my fingertips, but it's an important area for us.
Yeah, have you tried to talk to them, Charlie?
I went down there for a rewilding day. I was invited to Cirencester, and I got together half a dozen people that we could all stand up on the stage and talk about the subject. And it was a lovely day. And I guess 20 students turned up. There was 150 others that weren't students, but the students weren't interested. The question was why, and having a conversation with the teaching staff afterwards over a warm glass of wine, it became clear that they weren't interested.
I'll take that one away.
Dangerous ground.
Okay. We've got one.
I have a question about, you said the EU 40, here. The
Sorry.
EU 40 years ago, whenever it started, 70 years ago, about subsidies here were dysfunctional. I have two questions. What have you lost? What has Britain lost by Brexiting in this area? And how is the government and the rewilding efforts looking abroad for ideas and best practice?
Okay.
From my point of view, we haven't lost anything in terms of farming and nature. We've actually gained an enormous amount by breaking away. And I don't know if you've read the EU's policy document on the future for nature for the EU. And it's a sort of, let's take the British example and then we'll increase the percentages by 10%. And so we'll make it better, but it might never happen sort of feeling. So, for me, with the 25-year thinking for both agriculture and the environment, I'm feeling happier that we've got a plan that actually might work.
I mean, it was very exciting, to be honest, to be able to put in place the Agriculture Act and the Environment Act and actually the Fisheries Act, to be able to put in place frameworks that work for this country and to make that progress. So, and we have been able to make that since leaving the EU. As you say, that the EU is doing making some progress in that direction itself. We do a lot of talking to other countries about what they're doing and learning from each other. I've got a particularly close link actually with colleagues in Ireland and who have quite a very big kind of agricultural community and real challenges around
both on nature and climate change, and we share a lot and have joint kind of research projects and so on. So continue to kind of have those links, but some of what we've been able to do has been since leaving the EU.
There's one down here, sorry, just before here. Yeah.
So I'll try and keep it brief because I'm a complete layman and I've got about 65 questions. But I just wanted to say on the back of your slightly depressing Cirencester experience, I'm an absolute huge fan of what you're doing at Knepp. I suppose one question, and I know you're a rewilded estate rather than a safari park, but do you see any future in introducing wolves?
Thank you so much for that question.
Oh, and I'd just like to reiterate, because it wasn't quite answered, about the untidiness.
Yes, we don't do the untidiness.
I think, am I not right in saying that when you started, there were some people locally to you that were slightly appalled, and I hope they've now come round?
More than that, I was appalled. So you start off by seeing, I'll answer the second one first, because I forgot about it. When the park, the Repton Park, which had been restored to its former glory-ish, with grasses rather than arable, the creeping thistle started to move in. And it made me so nervous. It was that feeling, we've got to get the sprayer out. We've got to control this. And once you get over that, and think a little bit more about what that plant is and what butterflies feed on it and get to know the ecology a bit better, you start to relax. And that whole feeling of messiness disappears because it's not messy anymore. It's just life. It's just full of life. What was the first question? Sorry.
Wolves.
Oh, yeah, thank you for that. Yeah. I think it's sort of unlikely, isn't it? And I think that probably what we could hope for in my lifetime is to have a population of Eurasian lynx. Stealth predator in woodland, in big patches of woodland. They need big areas, but that might be possible. But the wolf and the bear, I don't know if you know that, I mean, there's twice as many wolves in Europe than there are in North America. There's 10 times as many brown bears in Europe than there are in North America. We in England and Scotland and Ireland don't really think about these animals. They're not part of us. They're not going to arrive. They've got to be brought and placed. And the likelihood of them being brought and placed seems to be a far, far vision.
But you've introduced beavers.
We've got beavers, we've got storks. We're thinking about red-backed shrikes with DEFRA. We're thinking about the black-veined white. Winston Churchill tried to bring it back to this country, but his gardener burnt the rose bush that the black-veined white pupa were on. And so, yes, and we've got an amazing project just locally, which is the Duke of Norfolk's project, which is curlew, and he's bringing back the curlew. So there's lots of lovely things to bring back, and we will rebuild and give more space to nature, and then maybe one day there will be enough space for nature to think about these top predators and having some trophic cascades in our lives.
There was one here.
Thank you. Tamara, like you, I trained originally as an engineer, so I understand the importance of frameworks and processes and so forth. And they are very important for laying the groundwork for action. But you only eventually get change when actions are taken rather than just plans and targets being set. Are both of you concerned about the pace of actions that we're taking in this country?
I mean, we'll get Charlie's view. I mean, I think that we have made incredible progress in setting the frameworks, but actually starting to take actions. Some of the things I talked about that we need to, the reform of how we parcel out the money to incentivise nature and some of the activity that will reduce emissions
very real and is happening now. Our kind of work to change the way in which we collect and use our waste and have a kind of circular economy in terms of our waste. They're real kind of programs I've got some confidence about. Some of these things will take time, but I do think we're in a very different place than we have been. The thing is that the challenge is so immense. You know, the thing, as I said, you know, we've put into law that we are, or both that we reach net zero by 2050, and also that we kind of reverse species decline by 2030. Those feel like pretty immense challenges. I think we're doing the right things, but you know, getting them in the pace, I won't pretend it's easy, but I do think it's we're on absolutely the right path. Don't know, what's your feeling about it?
I think it's very, very frustrating. But luckily, you can get on and do things. You don't have to have government involvement. You can get on, you can do it. And so when you're seeing big changes and big things are happening, they're happening all around us. And it's just private enterprise and private thinking, and yep, I'm going to do that. So yes, there's some things that you need to ask government about, licenses for beavers, for instance. That hasn't stopped England being covered in beavers, I'm afraid. So I think there's lots of things happening, and it is probably through frustration. Government tends to work slowly and carefully and cautious. But that doesn't mean that you have to. Am I being naughty? Sorry.
No, that's great. Let's take the final question, I think. You're taking that, but there's definitely someone at the back, right at the back. Let's go for the final question.
Thanks. I think we've been quite lucky in the UK, compared to many other countries, to enjoy quite a high degree of political consensus on climate and nature issues, despite many difficulties. And I just wondered, and this is perhaps a question for both of you, what you've observed to be the ingredients of consensus, and how do we maintain high levels of political consensus going forwards with some of the challenges we're currently facing?
I get to see groups of from the House of Lords and from the Commons quite often, and I get to see all parties, and they come down and we chat and we think about what they're thinking, and it's pretty clear that there are some political organisations that are thinking much clearer than others, and the consensus, I don't really see it. I see the backbiting and the shuffling and the counterpoints and I still worry deeply about that, and not having that consensus in such an important issue as the future of all of us fills me with slight dread. You're a civil servant, you can't say anything about this sort of thing.
Well, I can say that sometimes you feel that if you're being attacked that what we're doing isn't right from both sides, maybe you're getting it sort of right. And we do get some of that. But I suppose the thing I'd say about my kind of observation around politicians is that they are rightly driven by their constituents, and you know, it really matters that people care about these issues and talk to their politicians about it. There was once, I think I heard Jamie Oliver once say that he talked to about the importance of school food to an education secretary of state and said, you need to do these things and change school food. And the secretary of state said, make me, as in, if you drive a kind of public interest in this, I can do it in a way that I can't do it without that consent. So actually there is a role for all of us, and of getting, you know, the public, if there's a consensus in the public, you drive much more of a possibility of consensus in our politicians. But with that, thank you to the audience very much.
I feel I really should respond to Sean Moore's challenge to rewild Westminster Abbey Institute by going feral at this point. But I shan't do that. Last night, we were at an event and met after a 10-year gap somebody from the British Food Fortnight who had organised with us here in Westminster Abbey an enormous harvest festival celebration 10 years ago, and the Duchess of Cornwall, now Her Majesty the Queen, attended. And I was really struck in that conversation by how little at Westminster Abbey we do for the rural part of our extraordinary United Kingdom. And this evening, I hope that one of the things we have done is to have welcomed in some very, very essential rural issues which really touch on all of our lives, not just on food, but in all sorts of other ways as well. This is not just an urban institution. This is an institution which is committed to serving our entire country. And I hope that what we've heard this evening will be a bit of a spur to us to do a bit better institutionally, working with the rural world. I want to thank both of our speakers very, very sincerely. There are so many themes to try to pick up, and I'm not going to try to do all of them, I promise. I do just want to comment on a couple, I think. The first really is a sense that was emerging in my own mind, and forgive me, I'm a priest and a theologian, which is a very dangerous combination at this point in the evening. But this sense of being willing to engage in Sabbath, in allowing space for healing, allowing nature to, as it were, have a bit of a say in all this, and that the scale of the change and the sort of challenges of the change in budgetary terms, in global terms, shouldn't put us off from, as it were, taking a bit of a risk and not just applying another sticking plaster to our planet, but actually being willing to embrace some time with this. I was very cheered that both of our speakers not only had huge numbers of ideas, huge expertise and passion, but a sense of encouraging us to embrace the scale of the challenge. Tamara mentioned, scientists and engineers working together. If this is truly going to be something which can heal our planet, we're all going to have to work at this. I was very struck by what Charlie said about his own project, emerging from poor quality land, and yet this sense with the sounds and smells of Africa in your nostrils and your ears, sort of hunch that some kind of change might be possible. So often in healing, again, forgive me, I speak as a priest here, healing people's souls, that comes so often from a hunch that all is not well before an intellectual diagnosis. We have hunches in our society that all is not as it should be. And this evening we've had tantalizing glimpses into how all of us might begin on that journey, which will be start, stop, fast, slow, of healing our planet. One final thing. Fruit trees. As I was listening to Tamara and Charlie, I could see this great Vivarini portrait, picture of the Virgin and Child behind me, which is surmounted by a massive swag of fruit. That's, of course, a feature of the Italian Renaissance. On one level, it's no more than that. But in the Hebrew Scriptures, we have fruit trees in Genesis, in Ezekiel, in the book of Daniel, as we heard read this evening, and in the Christian Scriptures as well, of course, also in the book of Revelation, drawing on imagery from Ezekiel, the trees for the healing of the nations. So in thanking our speakers, I want to encourage us all to take heart, to do our bit. I want to thank you very much indeed for coming this evening, for your questions, for your interrogation, for your presence here. Friends, will you please just join with me once more in thanking very profoundly Tamara and Charlie